Medieval families never slept through the night, and if they did, they were probably dead by morning. What you think you know about medieval home security is completely wrong, and the real methods they used would terrify you. Life after sunset in medieval villages wasn't exactly what you'd call peaceful. When darkness fell, the real dangers came out to play, and peasant families knew they were pretty much on their own. Bandits loved the cover of night. These weren't your Hollywood romanticized outlaws either. They were desperate, often violent men who'd strip you of everything valuable and leave you for dead without a second thought. Roads became hunting grounds after dark, but smart thieves knew the real prizes were inside homes where families kept their meager savings, food stores, and anything worth stealing. They'd creep through villages like shadows, testing doors and windows, looking for easy marks. Then there were the wolves. Hungry packs would venture closer to human settlements when winter bit hard or prey ran scarce in the forests. A wolf doesn't knock politely. It'll tear through whatever keeps it from a meal, whether that's your livestock or your children. Wild boars caused havoc too, along with bears in some regions. These animals feared fire, sure, but a dying fireplace in the middle of the night left families vulnerable. Fire posed its own nightmare. One stray ember could torch an entire village within hours. Thatched roofs, wooden walls, hay stores, everything was basically kindling waiting for a spark. Accidents happened, but sometimes fires were deliberately set by enemies or rivals. Speaking of which, feuding neighbors could get seriously nasty in medieval times. Clan disputes, property arguments, or even petty grudges might escalate into nighttime raids. Your neighbor's cousin's brother-in-law decides your sheep wandered onto his land? Well, burning down your barn seemed like reasonable payback to some folks back then. Revenge was often personal, brutal, and came when you least expected it. But here's the kicker. No police force existed to call for help. No fire department would come racing to save your burning home. No emergency services whatsoever. When trouble struck, families had exactly one option: handle it themselves or suffer the consequences. Village justice was rough, community protection was spotty, and survival depended entirely on your own preparation and wit. The darkness brought uncertainty, and uncertainty could mean death for the unprepared. Medieval families quickly learned that hoping for the best was a fool's strategy. Smart survival meant assuming the worst would happen and building defenses accordingly. The question wasn't whether danger would come knocking. It was when, and whether you'd be ready to keep it outside where it belonged. Medieval peasants weren't exactly hiring contractors from Home Depot, but they knew a thing or two about building walls that could stop trouble in its tracks. Thick wattle and daub construction became their go-to defense system. What's wattle and daub? Basically wooden strips woven together like a basket, then slathered with a mixture of mud, straw, and sometimes animal dung. Sounds gross, but this combo dried rock hard and could deflect arrows, keep out wild boars, and make life miserable for anyone trying to break through. The thickness mattered more than you'd think. While modern drywall crumbles, if you look at it wrong, these medieval walls were often 8 to 12 inches thick. Try punching through that with your bare hands. You'll be there all night making enough noise to wake the entire village. Windows presented a tricky balance. Too big, and you're basically inviting thieves to window shop your belongings before helping themselves. Too small, and you're living in a cave. Medieval builders solved this by placing windows high up on walls, sometimes 7 or 8 feet off the ground. This let in precious daylight while keeping the opening well above head height for most people. Smart, right? Then there's the doorway situation. Ever notice how medieval doorways look ridiculously narrow? That wasn't a design flaw or because people were shorter back then. Narrow entrances created natural choke points where only one person could enter at a time. If bandits came knocking, the family could focus their defense on a single, predictable entry point, rather than worrying about multiple attackers spreading out. But here's where medieval peasants got really clever with their whitewashing technique. Those bright white walls weren't just for looks. They served as an early warning system. Any crack, hole, or damage showed up instantly against the white background. During morning inspections, families could spot if someone had been testing their defenses overnight or if weather damage needed immediate repair. The weird part is how they reinforced everything at night. Iron shutters weren't common since metal was expensive, but wooden shutters reinforced with iron strips or studs did the job. These weren't your decorative farmhouse shutters. They were thick, heavy barriers that could stop axes and crossbow bolts. Some families even developed layered shutter systems. The outer wooden shutters provided the main protection, while inner coverings made from thick animal hides added another barrier. Double protection meant double the security, and honestly, double the work every evening. Speaking of evening routines, all these defensive walls and barriers meant nothing if the doors and windows themselves were weak points. You've got thick walls and narrow entrances sorted out, but what happens when someone actually reaches your door? Medieval peasants knew that a beautiful home meant nothing if burglars could waltz right through the front entrance like they owned the place. Heavy wooden beams became the medieval deadbolt. These weren't your average pieces of wood either. We're talking about massive oak or ash planks that could stop a charging horse, let alone some opportunistic thief trying his luck after midnight. Families would slide these beams across their doors every single night, creating a barrier that required serious commitment to break through. The noise alone would wake half the village. But here's where it gets interesting. Simple iron locks started appearing even in peasant homes. Sure, they weren't fancy, but they didn't need to be. Most thieves back then weren't master locksmiths. They were desperate people looking for easy targets. A basic lock meant they'd have to make noise, spend time, and risk getting caught. Smart deterrent, really. Windows presented a whole different challenge. Glass was for rich folks, so most peasants covered their openings with whatever worked. Animal skins stretched tight across frames created surprisingly effective barriers. Think of it as medieval security film. Thick wooden shutters reinforced these weak spots, and many families added metal brackets or bars for extra protection. Then there's the genius of intentionally squeaky floors and hinges. While we oil our hinges today to stop annoying sounds, medieval families often left them deliberately noisy. Why? Because silence meant stealth, and stealth meant trouble. A creaky door hinge at 3 in the morning was better than any alarm system. Same logic applied to floorboards near entrances. The weird part is how they sealed every tiny gap with extra daub, that clay and straw mixture we mentioned earlier. This wasn't just about keeping drafts out. Curious eyes could peek through cracks, sizing up what was inside worth stealing. Worse, determined intruders might enlarge these gaps enough to squeeze through. Peasants learned to check and reseal these spots regularly. Some families even created false weak points, areas that looked vulnerable but were actually reinforced. Clever misdirection that could waste an intruder's time while the family prepared their response. All these door and window tricks worked great for keeping humans out, but medieval nights brought other problems too. Sometimes the real threat wasn't a person trying to break in. It was your own neighbors turning against you, and that required completely different defensive thinking. Medieval villagers figured out pretty quickly that staying safe wasn't a solo job. When darkness fell and danger crept closer, the smartest communities banded together like their lives depended on it. Because frankly, they did. The night watch system became the backbone of village security. Groups of men took shifts patrolling the streets, armed with whatever they could find and a healthy dose of paranoia. These weren't trained guards or professional soldiers, just ordinary farmers and craftsmen who knew that staying awake tonight meant everyone could sleep safely tomorrow. They'd walk predetermined routes, checking shadows and listening for trouble. But here's where it gets clever. They developed a communication system that would make modern emergency responders jealous. One sharp whistle or shout could wake half the village in seconds. The sound would ripple from house to house, person to person, creating an instant alert network. No smartphones needed, just good lungs and neighbors who actually cared about each other's welfare. When threats got serious, families abandoned the every man for himself mentality completely. Multiple households would gather in the strongest house available, turning individual targets into a fortified group. Suddenly, instead of facing scattered, vulnerable families, attackers encountered a concentrated defense force. Smart move, considering most bandits preferred easy pickings over actual fights. Village militias formed naturally from this cooperation. These weren't fancy military units with matching uniforms and formal training. Think more like armed neighborhood watch groups who'd practiced enough to know which end of a pitchfork worked best. They responded quickly because they lived right there. No waiting for distant help that might never arrive. Then there's the watchtower innovation that changed everything. Positioned strategically around village perimeters, these simple structures provided early warning systems that gave everyone precious extra minutes. The watchman could spot approaching trouble while it was still far enough away to mount a proper defense. Some villages built elaborate towers. Others just used tall trees or existing buildings. What made this whole system work wasn't complex organization or expensive equipment. It was the understanding that individual survival depended entirely on group survival. Everyone had skin in the game, which meant everyone stayed alert and ready to help when needed. Of course, even the best community watch couldn't prevent every threat from getting close. When human vigilance reached its limits, medieval families turned to some surprisingly clever backup systems that never slept, never got distracted, and definitely never failed to raise hell when strangers came calling. Medieval peasants basically turned their homes into burglar alarm systems using whatever they had lying around. And honestly, some of these methods were pretty genius. Dogs were the ultimate security guards back then. These weren't pampered pets sitting on silk cushions. They were working animals who earned their keep by barking at anything suspicious. A good dog could hear footsteps from way farther than any human. Plus, most thieves knew that a loud, aggressive dog meant the whole village would wake up fast. But here's where it gets interesting. Geese were actually better than dogs in some situations. Why? Because geese are naturally paranoid and incredibly loud. They'd honk and flap their wings at absolutely everything. Strangers, wild animals, even weird shadows. Roman soldiers famously used geese to guard important buildings, and medieval peasants caught on to this trick too. Then there were the makeshift noise traps scattered around doorways. Families would tie small bells to their door handles and window shutters. Anyone trying to sneak in would accidentally ring these bells, waking everyone up instantly. Some peasants got creative and hung metal pots or pans near entrances. One wrong move and you'd have a symphony of clanging metal announcing your presence. Gravel and small stones served as medieval motion sensors. Peasants would scatter them around the outside of their homes, especially under windows. Try walking quietly over loose gravel. It's basically impossible. Every step creates this distinctive crunching sound that carries surprisingly far in the quiet countryside. The really clever families set up tripwires using rope or thin branches. These weren't meant to seriously hurt anyone, but rather to make intruders stumble and create noise. Some tripwires were connected to hanging objects that would crash down when triggered. Nothing says burglar alert like the sudden crash of farming tools hitting the ground. Well, the weirdest alarm system involved dried beans or peas scattered in wooden bowls near doorways. If someone bumped into these containers in the dark, hundreds of beans would spill across the floor, creating this distinctive rattling sound. Plus, trying to walk on scattered beans without slipping was nearly impossible, kind of like medieval banana peels. These natural alarm systems worked because they didn't require any special technology or expensive materials. Just animals, household items, and basic physics. The key was making enough noise to wake the family and alert neighbors before any real damage could happen. Of course, having all these alarms was only useful if your house was positioned smartly in the first place. Medieval peasants weren't stupid when it came to picking where they'd build their homes. Location meant everything back then. Your house placement could literally be the difference between waking up alive or not waking up at all. Rivers became natural bodyguards. Attackers couldn't sneak up from the water side, and crossing a river while trying to rob someone? Good luck with that. Cliffs worked even better. Nobody scaling a rocky wall in the dead of night just to steal your turnips. Dense forests created natural barriers too, though they came with their own wolf-related problems. Then there's the clever trick of turning your front door away from main roads. Why make it easy for passing bandits to spot your entrance? Houses faced toward the village center or toward other homes instead. This forced intruders to navigate around buildings, giving neighbors time to notice suspicious activity. Village borders got their own protection systems. Thick hedges weren't just for looks. They created painful obstacles for anyone trying to rush in. Wooden fences might not stop a determined army, but they definitely slowed down casual thieves. Some villages even dug shallow ditches along their perimeters. Nothing says, go rob someone else, quite like face planting into a muddy hole. Clustering houses together created an interesting defense strategy. Buildings packed tightly meant intruders couldn't move freely between them. Narrow alleyways became choke points where one person with a pitchfork could hold off several attackers. Plus, sound traveled easily between close buildings, so one family's trouble quickly became everyone's problem. But here's where medieval pragmatism really shines. If your house kept getting attacked, you just moved it. Seriously. These weren't permanent structures like modern homes. Families would literally dismantle their wooden frames, bundle up their materials, and rebuild somewhere safer. Can't rob a house that's no longer there, right? The weirdest part is how some villages rotated their most vulnerable homes inward over time. Houses on the outer edges faced the most danger, so communities gradually shifted their layout. Newer families, or those who ticked off their neighbors, got stuck with the risky spots. Smart villagers also avoided building near crossroads or popular traveler routes. More foot traffic meant more potential thieves scoping out targets. Better to be slightly inconvenient to reach than conveniently located for criminals. All this strategic positioning worked, but medieval families still needed backup plans when location alone wasn't enough. After all, even the best-placed house couldn't protect itself if you didn't have the right tools and materials ready when danger actually showed up at your door. Medieval peasants weren't exactly shopping at the local weapons store, but they sure knew how to improvise when trouble came knocking. Every household kept certain items within arm's reach that could quickly transform from everyday tools into life-saving defenses. Hot water was the medieval equivalent of pepper spray. Families always had a pot simmering over the fire, and when intruders tried breaking in, that scalding water became their first line of defense. Pour it through those narrow windows or splash it near doorways, and most attackers would think twice about continuing their invasion. Sand worked similarly well. Heat it up in a pan, and you've got a face full of burning particles that would send anyone running. Then there's the beauty of farming tools doubling as weapons. That axe you used for chopping wood, perfect for defending your doorway. The long-handled scythe from harvest season made an excellent spear substitute. Even simple wooden sticks became formidable clubs when your family's safety was on the line. Peasants didn't need fancy swords when they had practical tools that packed just as much punch. But here's where medieval ingenuity really shines. Families stockpiled stones indoors, not outside where attackers might use them too. These weren't decorative rocks either. We're talking about carefully selected throwing stones, sized perfectly for human hands and stored in baskets near windows and doors. When bandits approached, a barrage of well-aimed rocks could discourage even the most determined thieves. Escape routes were just as important as fighting back. Strong wooden ladders stayed ready near roof hatches, allowing families to climb up and flee across connected rooftops if ground-level defense failed. These weren't flimsy ladders that might break under pressure. Medieval families invested in sturdy escape equipment because their lives literally depended on it. Smoke proved surprisingly effective against wild animals prowling around at night. Wolves and bears generally avoided areas with strong smoke signals, so peasants would strategically burn damp wood or certain herbs to create thick, lingering clouds around their homes. The smell alone often kept predators at bay without requiring any direct confrontation. What's fascinating is how these defensive preparations became second nature. Children grew up knowing exactly where the throwing stones were kept, how to heat sand quickly, and which farming tools worked best for protection. Every family member had assigned roles when danger threatened. While having all these defensive tools ready was crucial for immediate protection, medieval communities understood that prevention worked even better than reaction. The most effective security came from making potential troublemakers think twice before attempting any crimes at all. Getting caught stealing in a medieval village wasn't exactly a slap on the wrist situation. We're talking about punishments that made people think twice before even looking at someone else's chicken. Public humiliation was the name of the game, and boy, did they get creative with it. Thieves found themselves locked in stocks right in the village square. Everyone walking by could see who the troublemaker was. Kids threw rotten vegetables. Adults shook their heads in disappointment. Your reputation? Gone faster than bread at a feast. The shame stuck around long after the bruises healed, which was exactly the point. But here's where it gets interesting. Villages didn't just punish and forget. They turned into medieval news networks, spreading word about troublemakers faster than gossip about the Lord's new wife. If someone caused problems in one village, neighboring communities heard about it within days. Suddenly, that thief couldn't just move down the road and start fresh. Their reputation followed them like a bad smell. Then there's the family connection system that made everything personal. Medieval families weren't just mom, dad, and kids living alone. Extended families, neighbors, and friends formed tight networks that could mobilize quickly when trouble hit. Attack one house, and you might find yourself dealing with 20 angry villagers armed with farming tools and bad attitudes. Laws back then actually required men to help their neighbors under attack. This wasn't some friendly suggestion, it was mandatory. Ignore a neighbor's cry for help, and you'd face serious consequences yourself. Makes sense, right? Everyone understood that today's victim could be tomorrow's hero. The really smart part was how they handled repeat offenders. Medieval villages didn't have fancy rehabilitation programs or multiple chances. Cause trouble too many times, and you got banished, completely cut off from the community that provided protection, food sources, and work opportunities. In a world where being alone meant almost certain death, banishment was terrifying. Heavy fines also did the trick. Steal something worth a few coins, and you might owe the equivalent of months of wages. Most people couldn't afford that kind of debt, so the risk became enormous compared to any potential reward. This whole system created a powerful deterrent effect that modern security systems would envy. Everyone knew the consequences were real, public, and permanent. Word traveled fast, justice was swift, and second chances were rare. Medieval villagers understood something we sometimes forget. The best security system combines immediate consequences with long-term social pressure, making crime simply not worth the risk.